You can start. Okay, go.
Bienvenidos, everyone. Welcome all to this Friday first subcommittee meeting. I am extremely excited. I want to just first of all acknowledge the reality in our city. We know that since the primary on Tuesday, things have transformed and transitioned at City Hall. But I want to just continue to keep the momentum going here. We're not going to stop the work that we have been doing. We're going to continue to move it forward. We have 6 to 7 months of work to accomplish. And to be reassured, Thomas Warfield has already reached out to Malik Evans, who already is aware of the work that we are doing. So we're just going to pave the way with a new mayor in 2022 to ensure that we will make the creative economy vibrant and once again thriving. I will acknowledge Mayor Lovely Warren's contribution to this work. Without her literally calling us together and also supporting us with the staff at City Hall, Justin, Roy, and Kevin, and Joanna, and Sarah, and Bree. These are really important community partners for us. I mean, I know they're employees, but they are also citizens of our city, and they have as much invested in this work as many of us do, just from a different perspective. So the goal for today is really to jump in and find a process that we can work collaboratively together, as well as ensuring that we actually make progress and we spend the money this year by providing opportunities to artists in our community. One last piece, since Thomas isn't here, we want to acknowledge the land that we are work in, live in, and create in. We are on borrowed land taken from our ancestors of the indigenous peoples. We want to acknowledge the sacred land, and we thank them for allowing us to be and do this work in our community. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone. Let's begin with the agenda and we'll move through the process. Any questions, just give us, your head, either chat, you can add a question in there or raise your hand. We're an open process here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. So I assume everybody can see the agenda now. And so essentially what we want to do here today as a subcommittee of the Arts and Creative Community Committee, our subcommittee here is called the Arts Investment Guidance Subcommittee. And I just want to thank you all for being part of it. I know that when we first reached out to everyone to consider being part of the AC3, that it was framed as being, here's a committee that you could be a part of, and you did not expect necessarily that it would branch off into subcommittees and that might require more of your time. So I'm very grateful to you for that, and appreciate that we're all just kind of staying flexible and figuring out the best path forward. And as you're aware, there's a different subcommittee, the Creative Community Empowerment Plan Subcommittee, that's looking at sort of the Arts Master Plan. Some of you were at that meeting on Wednesday and have intentions of being on both subcommittees. You are more than welcome to do that. And I'll also say, if over time, as you feel like this is too much of a commitment, if you need to drop off of one of those or even drop out entirely, that would be unfortunate, but completely understandable. We want to be respectful of volunteers' time. So we're all kind of figuring this out as we go, because it's new for all of us. So so also I just wanted to tag on to what Annette mentioned about the transitions that we're experiencing right now with the primary, and all signs point to having a new mayoral administration beginning in January with Councilmember Malik Evans being elected, and acknowledging the great support from Mayor Warren leading up to this point. And all signs point to Malik Evans believing in our efforts here as well, but we look forward to future conversations with him about this. As far as staff participation, most of the folks that are involved from City Hall on here we're in civil service positions, so we're not really affected by an administration change, in case you were wondering, with the exception of Justin Roy, who is our Director of Communications. He's in a different department than the rest of us. He is, in fact, in an appointed position, so I can't speak to whether or not that will continue. Sometimes folks in appointed positions continue through to a next mayor, and sometimes they don't. So I'm going to get in touch with him. I don't know what this means for him just yet, and honestly, the decision probably hasn't been made. But just be aware that that's an issue with our city staffing. But from the city planning office's perspective, and I'm sure I can speak for folks from law department and recreation and human services and library and DES, that we're super excited about this effort and are committed to moving this thing forward and partnering with you all to make this happen. Thank you for letting me get that out of the way. Just needed to acknowledge what was going on this week. So just a look at the agenda here. We want to kind of go over what is this Arts Equity Fund, which we've already discussed, but just a recap. And what is the role of the AC3 and this subcommittee in particular to fund aspects of the arts in our community and make some of those decisions. There's a lot of weeds to get into with this process in terms of how to design a process and the parameters that go along with it. But before we dive into the weeds of any of that stuff, I just want to have some time to talk sort of big picture. What are our hopes? What are our goals for this Arts Equity Fund and what we hope to do with it? And then over time, we can get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of that. A little bit today, but certainly follow-up meetings. We're not going to be able to fully design what we need to do at today's meeting. It's just the starting point. And that's kind of the main things we want to cover today. Any questions about the overall agenda here? Okay. So as we've discussed before, and I'll try not to be too redundant in things that we've said in the past or too expansive in that. But one of the main purposes of pulling together this AC3 is to provide some guidance to decisions made about this Arts Equity Fund, or AEF, that the mayor has put forth in her State of the City address this past January, I believe it was, and is throwing support behind that, including some money dedicated to that effort. And that this committee would provide some guidance on how that money might be spent, knowing that eventually this effort of all of us here at the AC3 will evolve into the establishment of a more formal arts commission, whereas this group is a little bit more ad hoc. And that formalized arts commission will have a more formalized, detailed set, a process outlined for how they provide guidance to the spending of that money. And so we're in, I hesitate to use the word interim. I don't know if that implies the wrong things, but we're kind of in an interim role here as the AC3 for that kind of funding. And then the other subcommittee, of course, is working on the Arts Master Plan, which will get into the nitty gritty of how do we form an arts commission? What does it do? Who would be on it? How do they make those decisions? So they're kind of like parallel tracks that we're working towards. But what we need to talk about today a bit is, how can we spend that money? What's eligible? That sort of thing. And in that sense, I just want to mention, we've had a little bit of gray area, admittedly, because this is kind of new in these first couple of months here about how this money can be spent and on what types of art can be spent on. I'm starting to get a bit more clarity with help from our staff at City Hall about eligibility, and our take on it as of today is that this really needs to be primarily focused on public art and physical art or capital art, capital investments into something that has a physical long-term presence, as opposed to sort of non-public art like performances and giving money to artists or arts organizations, that sort of thing. I'm not going to say that's like an absolute black and white kind of thing right now. But my take currently is that we initially need to focus on the capital public physical art in this first year. And I think there appears to be room for a little more flexibility for that in future years, so that there is the possibility of getting more into um, performance art or non-public art in the future. But I really think that the focus for this first sort of pot of money and first year is on the capital side of things. We have part of our city hall team is Christina Hagenthaler in our budget office. I was hoping she'd be here today to if there are any questions about that, because she's a little bit more of an expert on that than I am. But that's kind of our current understanding of it. So I just wanted to throw that out there as to help sort of frame our discussion about what our investments might be moving forward. And I guess that's good enough for sort of just the general overview. And if anybody has any questions about from a sort of at a high level before we start getting into, what are the goals as far as this group is concerned. So will anybody like to chime in with any questions or thoughts on that? And I'll close the agenda here.
Kevin, did you confirm how much exactly total for capital art there is? Because I know discussion on Wednesday was that a portion of that would go to providing the consultant, whatever we want to call that team.
Yeah.
So do we have a specific number, or do we have any indicators?
Yeah, so here's what I know as of today. The percent for arts ordinance, which was developed back in 07, 08, somewhere around there, basically said set aside 1% of the total development costs of capital projects, not the whole city budget, but specifically capital projects like building a new bridge or improving a park, that sort of thing. Set aside 1% to be dedicated to investments in public art. That those investments don't have to be tied to that location necessarily. They could potentially be spent elsewhere. So there's a calculation that's done every year. The city budget office kind of estimates, okay, how much are these capital projects going to cost in this next budget year? And then what is 1% of that? So having done that, Christina and others having done that calculation for this year, it's in the neighborhood of $230,000. And we believe at this point, again, still trying to work out the details and the strings that are attached, we believe that money is eligible to be used for developing the arts master plan. Because as long as that arts master plan process includes specifically planning for investment in public art, like, how do we develop a process? Where might that public art go? So if that's wrapped into the master plan process, I believe that we can use some of that 236,000, and that the remainder is more or less money that this group or the larger AC3 can influence what happens with that remainder. As we mentioned at the last subcommittee meeting, there's honestly a really wide range of how much money we might spend on the master plan itself, the CSEP, depending on what we would like the consultant to help with versus what we think we could do here locally. It's a broad range that I would say maybe like 40,000 on the low end up to maybe a little north of 100,000 on the high end. My hunch is that we could do it for less than 100, but we'll have to work out those details. So that leaves a fair amount left over for investment in public art.
So there have been a few comments in the chat around flexibility. We're gonna hear some pushback around, it just being for public art, because for us, many of us were performing artists in art organizations. So that's going to be a piece. I just want to put that in, that we need to really advocate for. And if it means we have to write something or we have to speak to some people, I think that's going to be an important element.
Mhm.
Rena, Amanda, a couple of others have also chimed in the chat around that. So
Yeah.
that flexibility is very, very critical for
Yeah.
us. And we're going to actually insist upon that flexibility. Am I getting a yay on that one? Yes, thank you. Only
Yeah, and
because we have to help artists put food on the table. So, and I know you're doing your job. I just want to give you that, that feedback so that we can immediately start having those conversations with whomever we need to at City Hall.
yeah, definitely. I hear that because there's clearly a need, right? It's so important for the arts community and our community in general. I think the sticking point is that the money that goes into the pot is what we call capital money or cash capital money, and there are legal limits to how that money can be spent, and that's not necessarily a policy decision. It's a legal sort of um, ruling that's sort of behind that. And Johanna, I don't know if you have anything to chime in on that, but I think it actually goes beyond the city, and it has to do with state legislation around that. Is that right?
Well, but it's also that, that's specifically what council authorized back in 2009. The 1% was intended to be for installation of public art. So that specific pot of money was designated for a specific purpose by council. But that's not to say some of that couldn't be changed and going forward. If we went to council, there could be some changes, or there are other pots of money and other ways of doing the things that are so important to do with artists and performing arts. But it just can't be out of the 236 pot of money that was designated by city council right now.
Yeah, and also I think it's important to keep in mind that, like, what are we all, big picture, what are we working towards? Because it's not just this pot of money that we call the AEF, or the Percent for Arts. We're also working towards the establishment of an arts commission and some sort of arts alliance organization. And I think typically in other cities, that's often the source of money for funding artists and arts organizations in the sort of non-public art realm. Um, so that, that's probably part of our future here. I think for this initial kind of first steps of this group, we need to focus on the public art sort of side of things. And even if we were to, like, hypothetically go the complete other way and it was all towards artists and arts organizations, I would really want to temper expectations that this limited amount of money is going to really turn things around for those types of folks. It will certainly help, but it's not a lot of money when there are so many artists and arts organizations. It would be highly competitive. No matter how we slice it, folks are going to get left out, and it's going to be very disappointing. So I'm just being honest with you all. Like, we have to temper our expectations about how much this effort and this money can really rescue folks that are in dire need of that money. We hope to move in that direction and to help, but we have to temper expectations about how much that's really going to change things. It's a limited amount of money. Yeah, go ahead, Blue.
Hey, yeah, I was in some of those conversations back when that original ordinance was written. And I remember considerable debates. And Joanna, you may have the language right in front of you, so you can correct me on the final verbiage. But as I recall, there were heavy debates over whether or not the capital funds needed to be restricted to physical permanent sculpture. That was a more traditionalist approach to public art, of course, and there were advocates for that. Myself and others were really vocal about making sure that we used a very liberal, open definition of what public art was. That's not to be confused necessarily with funding organizations per se. I think that's a whole, it's really opening up a whole other conversation. But just specifically around a definition of public art, many of these cities that we look at, without needing to do a full-fledged study on this, are using public art that would include, for example, the funding of a parade, the funding of an outdoor performance, a poetry reading, a dance performance outside, any number of other more ephemeral experiences that are open to the public. We see that in many, many other organizations using a definition of public art that's that inclusive. So I'm wondering if it is actually written into the ordinance that we need to be, that those funds are only dedicated to physical objects, sculptures that last as long as a building.
So absolutely, it does not define public art. And I don't think anyone would argue that public art is restricted to, sculptures. I mean, and in fact, we had done some preliminary definitions that talked about, photography, weavings, prints, drawings, mobiles, frescoes, so I mean, but they are still physical things, but nothing that, and wall murals, clearly. So it's not going to be restricted to traditional sculpture or even traditional permanent paintings. It can be something very different from that. But whether it can be a performing art, I don't think that was the intent of it. Kevin and I are going to be meeting actually with our budget director fairly soon to get some little bit more direction on this, and we need to look at this language. But the way I read it, it talks about installation of art, and so I don't know how that could apply to a dance performance, for instance. And just still keep in mind that we have other funding sources. We're not saying that those other things, performance arts, aren't going to be supported. It's just this pot of money may be restricted to actual artwork, physical artwork, but we're working on it. So we haven't come to 100% conclusion on what that language means. But we're just sort of giving you a heads up that we think it does mean physical art, not performance type art at this point.
So I would definitely want to make sure, I apologize, Rena, make sure that we understand what we can spend money on. Does this include functional art like light poles? Does this include, bus stops that are functional art? So I'm advocating for those neighborhoods that don't get anything like that. Does it include the metal signs to identify a neighborhood? Does it include murals to slow down traffic? I know that's been a big discussion in a study for us in El Camino neighborhood, is how do we navigate through traffic? How do we slow that down through functional art? So those are the pieces I just want to make sure. A, we're going to spend this money in the city on art, and B, we want to spend more money from the city on performance. And Kevin, I agree, this is not going to get an artist out of a hole, but it's going to put food on the table and give them a house or home to live in for a couple of months. And that means survival. So I want to move our artists in the streets from survival to thriving. And I think that's the direction. Rena, chime in. I apologize for jumping in.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying with that, and that especially about the functional art in neighborhoods. But I also just want to go back and think about this in terms of what it means for us to be on a committee, many of us who are working right now to do exactly that, make sure that the things that we are advocating for are meaningful and are making a difference in people's actual lives, especially artists and creatives. So if we're talking about, like Johanna, thanks for mentioning that we have additional, we might be looking at additional pots, but thinking about how we roll these sorts of decisions out I would like to see that be more comprehensive so that people do understand that even though in this first round of that 236K, this might be going to these things. However, we're also not long range, like doing those things in tandem. So, sort of combining our efforts in that sense so that the first thing that we put out as a committee doesn't do exactly what we're all talking about, putting up, things that, art, structural art that that folks may not feel should be the most should have been prioritized over livelihoods, over functional aspects of our getting our neighborhoods into shape or transformed. Because that definitely wouldn't sit well for me if I wasn't on the committee, but it definitely won't sit well for me if my name is listed on a committee that that prioritizes in that way. So I just want to put that out there.
Rena, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying you wouldn't be comfortable if we're prioritizing the public art side of things.
Yeah, not comfortable if we're prioritizing that in a sense that that we have to wait to find out how we're going to bring in the other pieces that might be more performative, or actually again expanding on what kind of artists are actually benefiting from these kinds of funds, but also how our neighborhoods and our community is benefiting from it. So, for example, let's just say the entire pot went to, three projects that put a permanent installation somewhere, but we didn't address that we're also doing something along the lines that we're all talking about, that's more inclusive of of performance art, of programming around the arts, any of those things, then I don't think that would look well. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. So yeah, so how do we figure out how to do what Joanna is saying, look at those other resources at the same time, so that anytime we're rolling out any of these decisions that we're making, we're also able to include those in it. Yeah. If we can't, if we can't flat out change it, because I'm also for, first and foremost, flat out changing it, going back to city council, whatever we need to do, and saying, yes, we'd like to broaden that definition of public art to be more inclusive.
Yeah, and I understand that. Just keep in mind that this isn't entirely a city council decision. This is the strings that are attached to capital funding that goes beyond all of our pay grades, including city council's pay grades. That it's a policy that we have very limited ability to change. So I guess we have to face that that challenge of, can this money be used for exactly what we want it to be? And if we can't, what are we going to do? Because the limits are the limits. I mean, and we'll try and work around the edges, but that goes beyond us whether or not we can change that.
Yeah, let's look at that path though, because I don't think public funds are beyond any of our pay grades as folks who actually pay into that. Like, I really would like to know what that path would look like, and if it definitely is not just city council, what is that path? Who made that is it law, or we're talking about? And yeah, I'd like to just know more about the path. Sorry, Antonetta also has a hand up.
Yeah, and Rena, let me just say, we are, as I mentioned, we are going to, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so inclusion of performance art. First, what does the word inclusion mean to us? And are you someone with a disability? So we have different perspectives of what inclusion is, especially someone who has a disability compared to someone who don't have a disability. So for me personally, the accessibility of inclusion art, okay, statues, drawings, graffiti, but how does someone with blindness just access to that? Perhaps we can have Braille written outside for them to see, for the picture ID of that specific statue, or for that specific wall art, or for that specific, anything with a picture having some kind of writing in Braille, so they can see that, because we have a lot of people with blindness in the community here in Rochester, and not just adults, but children as well. So we want to get this accessible to children and educational to children as well. And now we're going on to the deafness. Okay, there's museums that have audio. That does not help us. That has audio recording, or if you go to the planetarium, well, how can deaf children go to the planetarium? There's no captions. There's nothing to provide them. Or you want to go to a performance, and does these people know how to request sign language interpreters in the event that that person comes? How can a person with blindness see the performance? So just kind of, yes, we want to get the creative artists out there. Yes, we want to put them up there. But how can we make it accessible? Like as we're talking about now, I hope that kind of makes sense in relation to what we're talking about.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, I just want to chime in because last week I sat in on a NISCA panel. I know Blue was there and probably Rena as well and whoever else. But the first two, phase 1 and phase 2, I do not qualify for. But I was relieved to hear that I qualified for phase 3, Rena. So for me, spending that hour and a half in that meeting, I was like, wow, there's nothing here for me until they talked about phase 3. And then all of a sudden my ears perked up. I'm like working my gateway into NISCA now. So I think and if I can, Rena, we want to make sure that we're still going to do public permanent capital art, but we want to find wherever those pockets of other money are so that we can also say to the arts community performers, we do have some money coming your way, or there's going to be funding in your way. And I say we advocate sooner than later to change it through, we have council members that are already committed, Gubner, Mary Lippin, and Miguel Melendez. All three of them agreed to be supporters of an arts, the AC3. So maybe that's a discussion we have sooner than later. I just wanted to give you that because with NISCA, it was so important that I be there, but I didn't qualify for the first two phases until phase 3. But now I have the information and I'm getting ready to submit for phase 3. And that feels empowering to me.
Annette, I just wanted to answer your question about the functional art, the signs or that sort of thing. Absolutely. This money can be spent on that. In fact, that's what a lot of it was spent on in the past. If there was a public works project, they might do decorative benches or decorative lighting or decorative signage. The concern I have is that it not be something, and this will be the criteria that we will have to set up, is that it not be like sort of off the shelf decorative, that it be, that it have a, a real artist design element to it, that we're not just getting stuff out of a catalog. That would be the concern. But absolutely, it'd be great if it's functional. Have two purposes, beauty and function. So, and then just to confirm that Kevin and I are going to be meeting with our budget director to get a very firm idea of what are the parameters of, how can this money be spent? Because he and I have sort of a general idea. It's not an area that I'm that familiar with. So we're gonna find out how flexible we can be, and we'll let you know.
Yeah, and to Rena's point too, if it appears like very rigid, what is the path forward to adjust that and advocate for that to be changed? Because I totally see the importance of that. I guess I would just caution about, if we're talking about public art like sculptures and murals and artistic benches and what have you, I would just caution against characterizing that as not as valuable as giving money to an arts organization or not being valuable to neighborhoods, because there will be local artists involved in creating that physical public art, and it will be present in neighborhoods, which is a value to all residents that live there. So I just want to be careful about, with all these different sort of potential ways we could invest, saying that, one is not as good as the other, or I think they all have some value. And I guess another thing I want to mention too, I appreciate Blue's earlier point about sort of experience, and maybe just for the sake of conversation, and at the risk of oversimplifying, but I've been sort of characterizing it as two categories, like public art and non-public art. But I think Blue brings up the point that there's maybe something in the middle that is a broader definition of public art that is really experience, and it's not permanent, but it's still obviously very valuable. So maybe, again, just for the sake of conversation, there's public art, which is your sculptures, murals, etc. There's art experience, which might be a parade or a performance. And then there's funding towards, artists or arts organizations, like just giving it directly to them because they're struggling and they're a critical part of our community. So it's almost like there's 3 categories. Does that sound accurate or helpful? Okay. All right. So
As far as that last category, I just need to make you aware that there is a legal restriction on city money being given to individuals. We can't do that. That's an unconstitutional gift. As worthy as someone might be, it can't be a person, it can't be a donation, a gift, a payment to an individual artist. There has to be public benefit. And so we have to be mindful of that. And there has to be something that the public receives in return. Right. And, you could argue, okay, if you give money to an artist and at some point, then they are able to produce some beautiful work of art. There has to be a fairly direct connection. So we just have to be a little mindful of that there is a limit on how much the city money can be given to individuals, even though it's for a wonderful cause, and there has to be a public benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And so maybe as we talk about that sort of third category, again, as we all agree is incredibly valuable and needed, that might be more likely to come in the form of funding that an Arts Alliance type organization is distributing, which I'm sure has happened in the past. And so all of our collective efforts to work towards establishing or reestablishing that kind of an organization, or again, building up Rock Arts United or Arts in the Loop or other groups like that, that's certainly on the table as well. Establishing that sort of nonprofit presence to serve that third category. So even if these funds can't go that direction, we're also trying to work towards that. Okay, so I guess maybe if we could transition to, what are our sort of overarching goals for this effort, keeping in mind that what's eligible is still a little fuzzy, but I think we could still get into, why we're doing this work and what kind of a difference do we hope to make, and that sort of big picture look will help inform the development of a more formal process and parameters and that sort of thing. So maybe we could just have sort of a general conversation about what we all hope to accomplish. Some of it's obvious and we've talked about it, but just to really kind of focus in on our goals there.
I'll take the bait there and jump in. For me, one of the big goals is that we start to show some best practices, in that there's a process, in that all artists are made aware of said funding, clear stipulations and guidelines for everybody to be able to apply. You know, if this is only limited to X, Y, and Z, all that is super clear and transparent. People know that in advance. And there's adequate timelines that are set out so that everyone can only those maybe with the most time would then be able to apply. I just think we have a lot of room to improve those in our local community public art history, public art, and just art funding history, period, in Rochester. So for me, it's about simple, straightforward, transparent process. And again, like we don't need to invent this stuff. There are examples all around us, east on the thruway, west on the thruway, and you know, a couple hour radius around us, we find numerous cities and communities that have really transparent methods for distributing public funding. And I just think all we really need to do is develop a little list of those, pull them, and we could be up in action with something that is transparent and equitable really quickly. So for me, that's the key priority.
Love it. Thank you, Blue. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you've been through this before.
Since 2008
You're
at City
very-
Hall.
you're very
2008 at
patient.
City Hall, talking
Very
about the 1%. Did I mention I talked about the 1% for the art thing in 2008? Okay, just
Oh, man. Other thoughts about what we really want to accomplish with this?
You know, I just want to add something, to clarify something. You know, I kind of gave the bad news that, you know, we can't give money to an individual artist to improve his or her skills or knowledge about how to respond to a call for art, okay? But we could give it to an organization that and that is helping artists, because then we would be providing the public benefit. There would be providing funding for organizations that are assisting artists generally with, you know, business skills for running their, you know, how to promote their art, how to respond to calls for art, different, you know, those skill sets that they may need. We could do it through an organization that was generally helping the art community. So while we couldn't give it directly to an individual artist, we probably could frame it in a way that we could give it to an organization that provides services to the art community. So just wanted to throw that in there.
And you're speaking about government money in general, but maybe not necessarily this particular pot. Well, that's sort of to be determined. Is that right?
Yeah, that applies to all government money. The city can't directly give money to individuals unless they're providing a service. So we have to figure out a way, you know, if we want to do this, helping artists to develop the skills they need, we could give it to an agency or an organization that provides that service. That's one way of doing it. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, I'd always been thinking about how there are all these empty buildings. Would the city be willing to cooperate in terms of, I don't know if this funding will cover it or the logistics, right? But the question of locations for performing art to happen and for performing art workshops to happen, can that, if it's in the public realm and accessible to all people, wouldn't that count as a way of supporting the performing arts by actually supplying or having a building or building spaces? Because there are a lot of buildings around the city that are just plain old empty. I don't know who owns them, what the city owns, but is that a possibility too, to help fulfill that public requirement and also help the performing arts to flourish on a long-term scale? Because the issue with performing arts is, performing artists could prepare for an event or such, but the real work comes in long periods of time to prepare. And the performance is just the fruit of months, sometimes years of working on something. So can that funding cover city spaces for that to happen? Yeah, and Antonietta is also mentioning safety as well. But yeah, that's been a long discussion too, is places, because they need places. A big problem for the performing artists is the cost to rent a space, to even put up one performance. It's really a lot. So they need performing space to practice and to show. And I would also say too, for the let's say the people who make physical objects, could that apply to those kind of artists too, so that like for sculpture, for example, it requires a lot of equipment. It's taking me a decade to just start to have a basic studio on my own. Makerspace is a great example of something like that. But would the city be able to fund something that with this 1% spaces where long-term making can occur?
Yeah, well, for starters, I'll just say that the city rarely owns these buildings. These are almost entirely privately owned.
Okay.
So that's just sort of like the ownership question. But Joanna, you want to
Okay.
chime in on
Yeah,
that?
I would have to say, Libby, that it's unlikely that there are any city-owned buildings that would be appropriate for the uses that you're talking about. If we take a building in foreclosure, for instance, which we're not doing now, but it's probably going to be in pretty rough shape and probably not suitable for anything that you're talking about. And I'm not aware that we own any large structures that aren't being used by the city for its own purposes. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's something that we could discuss with our real estate division, but I think it's pretty unlikely. And then once again, as I said, we can't give anything away. I mean, if we own a building, we have to either sell it or rent it for its market value. And so there may be some workarounds on that, but I don't think this is a likely possibility, but it's something we could talk about.
Okay, or even the funding could cover the rent for such
No,
space.
that's giving it away. We can't.
Oh, it's called giving away still.
Yeah, that's the trouble. It's if there is a space, say there were a city building that had appropriate space, and we have to lease that out to somebody for its fair market value. Otherwise, we're giving a gift to somebody.
But the funding can't be used to cover the rent for such spaces?
You mean the 1% fund, sort of the
Yeah,
city to
I mean,
reimburse itself?
Yeah, whether it be the city property or the property of some other private owner.
No, that absolutely not. No, I mean
that cannot be used for that.
No, but Olivia, it does bring up an interesting question that was sort of outside of city-owned buildings, which again are very few. Is it possible that this funding could help invest into a venue of some kind? So, I think of Jiva or Mach or Rocco,
Exactly.
or like if they are looking to expand or make
Or
improvements.
the Avenue Black Box Theater on
there's
780 Joseph Avenue that I did all of the renovations to myself. Sorry.
We hear you.
Right?
We hear you. We hear you, Rena.
I don't know the answer to that question, but it is Johanna, I don't know if you have thoughts about that. Would it be eligible like if, let's say there was a competitive grant process through this fund, if X amount or X percent was set aside for sort of making improvements at artists venues that the public benefits, I probably can't be just for like somebody's studio, even though that is clearly, as you pointed out, Olivia, a critical part of the overall ecosystem, the overall infrastructure. But could it?
Yeah,
could it go to
a group
venue?
community. Yeah,
Right.
group community. As an artist working in a group community, not like, you know, small private, you know, areas, obviously, but yeah.
Mhm.
You
And
know,
keeping it open to the
Right.
public, you know,
Right.
so that that educational aspect is always flowing throughout, you know, the whole project.
I think in all seriousness, what Olivia is talking about is interesting. The idea that spaces, art spaces, making them publicly, publicly more available. And there are costs associated with that. For example, if I were to open up the avenue to
Mhm.
make it available for a program that allowed artists to be able to use the space for rehearsal, which I do right now for free, like, is that something that could be funded, a program? I think it does bring an interesting point about when we think about public art, thinking about public art spaces where art is made, is an important piece of that everyone doesn't have access to. Artists may
Mhm.
not be making public art, because they don't have a public space they can use to actually make the art in.
Right.
So I've seen the transformation of malls across America into exactly what Olivia is talking about, artists, cooperatives, where the storefronts actually become the artist studios. And these actually become over time self-sustaining community art centers. So I love the vision. I love that idea. Let's stick with the money that we have right now and spending that down, and then continue to advocate. And also, there are a lot of developers in our community. So maybe we need an ally in a development firm that can seed this vision with us and contribute their time and expertise to redesigning buildings. There are a few right along the lake that I like a lot, the canal that I'm looking at myself. But the reality is, let's stay focused on the money that we have now, and how do we create a very transparent, easy process for getting public art done.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Annette, because again, this sort of gets outside of the percent for art effort here, but another way that we can invest in what Olivia and others are talking about is through housing that's dedicated to artists. And so there is the project on East Main, and I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it. Johanna, can you remember that right next to Eastman Gardens?
At
They
the Spiritus,
Spirit-
you mean the one at Spiritus, yeah.
Corpus Christi
Corpus,
Spirit.
Corpus Christi.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm like, wait, I got the wrong name, but
Thank you, Antonetta. Yeah, Corpus Christi was a private development project that's specifically meant for artists to live there, and that includes some artist spaces, individual and community, within the project. And the city put money into it. It was, primarily a private development, but we, believed in the vision of it. So there may be more opportunities to do that sort of thing. They've done a lot of that in Syracuse, in a project just west of downtown. The name escapes me there as well, but that's also something that, big picture wise, we can continue to invest in.
So Johanna, really quick, Johanna was saying that the money could not be given to one person, it had to be given to a group, right? And I'm thinking, well, what if that group picks the location? Because with the money, I don't know, this is a crazy thought, but it just came up. Because we were talking about, okay, well, we could find a group that could intentionally hire artists. Oh, but we also need to find a building that's safely accessible. So we're funding two different things, or can we fund the building? I mean, I'm sorry, the corporation that is invested in hiring artists and also getting accessible buildings.
Um, yeah, maybe. This is all something that we need to think about, and how we can be creative here. So the basic rules, we can't give it away to any individuals, and there has to be a public benefit. So within that, within those parameters, there are a lot of opportunities. Now, the thing that we just have to keep remembering is that we have this limited amount of money. The 236 is what we think right now, but there are other, and we don't want to spread it too thinly is the concern I have with so many needs here. It's hard to focus on where we get our most bang for our buck. But then also keeping in mind, there are other ways to accomplish some of those things you're talking about, that there are other funding sources from the city. There are other, the county, local foundations, rich people somewhere, there are other ways of accomplishing some of this without so diluting our 236,000 that we don't get some of the public art that we really are hoping to have. So that's just the thought. But yeah, there are all kinds of, you guys are just bringing up some wonderful ideas, and but I think we need to focus a little bit.
Yeah, and that's going to be that delicate balance of having the biggest impact with these dollars, but also spreading it out as much as we can. Like, what's that sweet spot? Because if we give it to 100 different efforts, I'll just say efforts as a broad category, you've touched 100 different or more folks in some way, but you've done it in a way that's very small, relatively speaking. If we give it to 5 different efforts, you've touched much fewer people, but you've impacted them in a greater way. Somewhere in the middle is that sweet spot that we'll all sort of have to wrestle with.
So Kevin, I have a question. So, because we don't have an arts master plan, we're not looking at a huge big picture. So we're kind of piecemealing all of these pieces together. And when I first moved here, NODA was the place that I found home. Sorry, that's where I found home. It was the first place I saw Thomas Warfield perform. I met writers and books. I probably met Rena there. It was my home that I discovered. But it's been 20 something years, and it's the only neighborhood of the arts in our city. And that's just a big lie. There are pockets. So I think I would love for this group to be very intentional about how do we pave those art pathways and connect those pathways together. So East Avenue, we know we've got Rogo, we've got the Eastman, we've got the Jazz Fest. Joseph Avenue, we have Rena, we have Joseph Avenue Arts and Culture. Clinton, we have La Marqueta and Conklin Cruisers and El Camino Trail. If we can just identify 5 areas of our city that we want to invest intentionally, we can actually create sort of the map for the master plan versus giving it away and then not having a big picture intentionality. And I'm just going to speak to truth. Joseph Avenue is a main public transportation corridor. It has no covered bus stops, none, no covered bus stops. Yet on University, we have a $25,000 design by Nancy Gong, who I love, bus stop, one. I could take that 25,000 and I would put 3 bus stops on Joseph Avenue and 2 on Clinton. I gotta get it in there, girl. Okay, but the reality is that we can be very intentional about what we wanna, where this public functional art can be, and it can actually be the dots that connect the master plan moving forward. So I just want to speak that because I know we're looking at where can we put it, and the other group is looking at the big picture.
Mhm,
but we can help them create that big picture. So
mhm.
just speaking that truth. I hope it helped. Let's.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you, Annette. That's going to be an important part of the work of this group is to think geographically and what locations. And if I could speak a truth or speak, you know, frankly about this, like whatever we decide, someone's going to be left out and someone's going to be disappointed. So we have to find a way to be okay with that to whatever degree we can, because we're dealing with scarce resources. That's whether it's the people in this group or the money that's available or time, we're dealing with scarce resources. So for example, if we're making this geographic decisions about let's focus on Joseph, which I love that idea, there's another place that doesn't make it this year. And we have to get to a place where we're okay with that, because we're not dealing with unlimited resources here. So those are the difficult conversations in front of us, and we are going to have to get into geography about, like you're saying, and Blue has said before, where are the existing assets? Let's map it out, and then where are the gaps? What neighborhoods are being left out? And also, where are the emerging opportunities? Like what's happening on Joseph is, I would consider that as like very emerging and exciting and like untapped potential. And so let's build on that. Let's invest in that momentum. But then there might be another place that has nothing, and like, okay, let's fill in a gap over here in some way. So those are the kinds of considerations we'll have to make. There'll be difficult decisions, and but at the end of the day, we're going to make progress. We're going to make some good investments in the community.
Annette, it was interesting that you to me that you raised the issue of the functional kind of artwork, because I just today sent Kevin an inventory that was done back in 2012, I think it was, of some of public art in the city. And it was mostly focused around Art Walk. And then of course it did include the bus shelters and the poles and it, you know, the mosaic poles and the whole thing. And so, and that was on that inventory, and I was thinking, well, is that what people would be satisfied as considering public art? So I'm so pleased that you think that is important to have that, because a light pole, I was driving around somewhere yesterday and I noticed the painted light poles on all four corners. And I thought, what a nice touch that is. You know, it's just a little bit of something attractive on an otherwise ugly light pole. And then even the utility boxes that are painted. And if that's something, and benches, that is, if that's something that we are going to accept as public art, that should be included in our inventory, because I was wondering whether we would include those, and you're actually saying, yes, absolutely, we should. Okay, that's good to know. Good.
People will take care of their neighborhoods that are
Yeah,
filled with arts.
yeah.
I mean, if you look at anywhere, I mean, so the functionality has to fit the neighborhood that we want to create their art in. I mean, I think that's the bottom line. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Can I just add, as we're talking about looking at geography, that as part of the process that we're considering, I think we need to make sure that we're getting input from the folks that live in these neighborhoods, so that we're not just deciding to put a thing there that folks don't want. So I think that needs to be thought about as we're talking about what the process is, that they have some kind of input into this discussion. So
Yes. Thank you, Chris. Great point.
You know, and I just so you know, the city has, I think, done a couple of fairly successful efforts in public art. And the one I'm working on right now is at Brooks Landing. And we sent out an RFP, got responses to it. And then we had a number of members of the community indicate that they weren't really happy with the submissions because they weren't reflecting the neighborhood enough. And so we had a wonderful meeting with the artist, Olivia, and some other, and the neighborhood, to talk about how we wanted to emphasize it was what the neighborhood wanted in that location. And it's a wonderful process. So yeah, we will replicate that and not make the mistake that we made the first time, which was trying to be a little too generic about what we wanted and involve the community more. Yeah.
I had a few other thoughts about how we might start to flesh this out into a documented process, but I realize I talk a lot of these meetings and I'm sorry. So I just want to give a little bit more space. Is there any other thoughts about sort of your general hopes and goals for this process before we get into, okay, how do we actually develop this thing? Nothing else? Okay. And certainly, if other ideas come up later, feel free to email the whole group or shoot it to me, whichever you like, because this is a fluid process and it's going to take a little bit of time. So in terms of how do we develop a process, once again, acknowledging the eligibility issues are still sort of out there and being fleshed out. I think the place to start is like, let's recognize what we already have in place, assets, and that talks about asset mapping, right? So I'll just mention a few things, and I think this group could probably build on it. So for starters, it's pretty clear that Johanna in blue and maybe others have already been involved with the process of creating a jury or a selection committee, or having a process for calling for submissions, reviewing it, and ushering it through to installation. Are there others in this group or the larger AC3? Let's not go beyond that because we'll go forever. But within this group or the larger AC3 that has experience with that process specifically.
In what process?
You,
Um,
yeah, like,
soliciting for public art or investment in public art in general, and being part of the process of selecting the artist and working it all the way through installation.
Yeah, I've been a part of juries and selection committees.
Okay, cool. Olivia, you were saying?
oh no, I don't qualify for that. I've been a juror. I've been a juror for things, but not public art and public art installation.
Okay, I think there's some
I've
overlap.
been an applicant.
Probably.
I'm an applicant. I have experience in doing it, going through the process and doing the public work.
Okay. And yeah, I think there's some overlap, even if it's not public necessarily, just in terms of what the process looks like. The other thing I'll mention, we heard from Thomas today, who sends his regrets, he's traveling, but he is starting to put together some sort of a sketch of a process and some parameters. So he's working on that right now, and we might be able to get that to a place where this group can review it and react to it and refine it. So he's already kind of started some of that work, which is great. Bree Harrison, who's part of the AC3 and works for the library, has been through this process soup to nuts, so she's going to be a resource. And I'll ask you, Johanna, and I would ask Bree the same thing. Any of the processes that you've been through, has the process been documented for how it should work and how it played out, that sort of thing?
I'm sort of at the tail end of it, almost like Olivia said. I've been on a jury. I've been a juror, and I draft the darn contracts. But I haven't been at the front end. But Ellen in DES is the person to talk, or Jeff Mrozik.
Okay. For
Yeah.
Brooks Landing.
And actually, Olivia, having her input on what things were not, did not work well for the artists on the other end of the artist call will be very helpful to know that stuff.
Yeah.
What was a problem for her as an artist. And she probably will point to one that I'm aware of right now, but.
Okay.
Kevin, let me just ask a quick question. I, like you, have been talking a lot, so I just wanted to throw this out there and then absolutely step back. What I was going to ask is, does the city feel, or is the assumption that the city is going to administer these funds as the convener? You know, you're asking who else has handled these types of processes, and I know the city has done some. Jeff has contacted me on a number of occasions to ask for feedback on those RFPs that have gone out. Does the city feel like this committee is going to change those dynamics and perhaps supplant some of the city's role? Assuming right now that what the committee is doing is giving the city feedback on what it already has done in the past, and it will do again. Is the city going to be in the role of administering this, ushering the process through, or will other partners usher that through?
We are somewhat restrained, because if it's city money going to pay an artist, yeah, we have certain requirements, city requirements for that. But we have always in the past had non-city employees involved in the process as being jurors. And so that is absolutely not a problem. And that's even in some of our policies. But what we're hoping, we would also like some input on our process. And if we can do a better job of putting out these artist calls. And so we absolutely are looking for input on that. You know, we have city engineers doing this, that's not their area of expertise. They kind of got dumped with a project and said, go find some artists to do this public art. So yeah, absolutely. We're open to better ways to do it within, you know, we have certain requirements that we have to do by law, but absolutely we would like some help with this.
Lou, do you have any specific concerns that you want to raise? You don't have to now, but if you wanted to, in terms of like how we could refine our process to make it better?
I think, frankly, I think getting more of the experts in the field into the process,
Okay.
into the leadership roles in the process. Just to Johanna's point, you know, I mean, Jeff, basically, I'll throw him out there. I think he'd be okay with this. You know, he expressed as much to me over the years. He's like, Blue, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need help. And I'm sure there are other people in your respective city departments. In fact, Amanda was there when I said this to Justin. Like, because a lot of us are not at the tables early on,
Mm-hmm.
we're now giving you feedback later on after the horse is out of the gate.
Mm.
And I think it really, you know, we should be up there right away, you know, defining public art for you, not, you know, again, like for me, defining public art is super easy. I just look around at the field and I see that it's a very broad definition, and that's the way things are trending. You know, this is because this is my, you know, my issue. I'm thinking about it all the time. You all are always in these hot seats, I think, because we aren't there early on. So I'm advocating for us being there much earlier and being in, you know, at all the tables and being in positions, not brought in after, but in there early on, crafting and or even administering these.
Yeah, that's great point, and really great to hear. And I my sense, and hearing from Jeff and Holly Barrett, who's our city engineer, she feels the same way. She's begging for artists to be involved in these processes, because she fully admits that's not her area of expertise. She loves it, she believes in it, but it's not her area of expertise. So I think this group can fully influence a better process of involving the right folks.
It will
moving
be
forward.
welcomed by our city engineering department, I can promise you.
Yeah.
Because Jeff handed it over to Ellen McCauley-Sofa and she's going, what am I doing? So,
Right.
Well, let me just add a little bit more to that then. Would we be saying, let's just fast forward to the press release that has the link to the, you know, RFP.
Mm-hmm.
Is that press release going to announce that this committee is responsible for overseeing the fund distribution? I understand that, you know, legal and the bookkeeping department at the city, et cetera, are going to write the checks. But is that press release going to show that Amanda Chestnut and Olivia and Chris and Blue and Rena and others, that this committee now is a meaningful driver of this new process?
I would think so. What do you think, Johanna?
Yeah, as you said, obviously, we're going to be paying the artists. The contract will have to be with the city of Rochester. But, I see your involvement in many parts of the process much more than now. So I don't know exactly. I mean, it's hard for me to figure out how exactly this will work, but I absolutely think we would welcome more input from the art community when we're doing calls for art, because that's not our area of expertise. So, how exactly, I can't say off the top of my head, but yes, we want there to be more input from the community on these.
Okay.
How about some kind of written agreement or letter of invitation, something that officializes our active participation?
As when we do a plan here, when the plan happens, I hope that we can come up with some general processes, procedures for this, so that we're not each time having a new process for putting these art calls out. So, and yet each time when there's a new project, we will want input from the community on developing the scope of work, basically, for each project. But the process, I think we should develop a general process that will be used every time, so that we're not kind of reinventing the wheel each time we do a new project. But honestly, I don't know how exactly this is going to work. I mean, that's what we got to figure out. So I'm not going to really give you an answer on that right now, because I don't know.
Okay, so I think we'll continue down this path of developing a process and some parameters and such, build off of what Thomas is putting together, build off of what experience you all have. Bree has really extensive experience with this, which is great. She's also completely buried in her normal day-to-day job, but she's a great resource. We'll build off of that. One last thing I wanted to mention, and I want to respect everybody's time here, and it's Friday afternoon, is that we're mostly today talking about this Arts Equity Fund, or the percent for the arts, in the neighborhood of $230,000 that's available. That's one pot. There's another opportunity for this group that's another pot that's a little bit different. And that's money that has been secured for creating public art at specific Rock the Riverway projects. So Holly Barrett, our city engineer, is managing the revitalization of the Charles Carroll Plaza on the west side of the river by Main Street, and the Sister Cities Bridge, that Y-shaped pedestrian bridge next to it. She has secured $300,000 for public art specifically for one of those projects, and another $300,000 for the bridge, so a total of $600,000. And she would love to have start a process like yesterday to get some relevant artists and experts together to help usher through that sort of call for submissions all the way up to installation. So it's like an immediate need for what this group is designed to tackle. So we're tackling the AEF, $230,000, but there's also the opportunity to dive right into this, not a hypothetical project. It's there. She's got money to do it. It's a different pot of money, and we have to understand that this category of money could potentially keep coming up year after year in parallel with the Arts Equity Fund. And future infrastructure projects, the engineering folks occasionally will be able to secure money for public art. and we'll look for some help in figuring out how to get that public art in place. So all that is to say that there's an opportunity to form a selection committee, or I'm not sure what the right phrase is, a jury, or however you want to call it, specifically for those two public art installations. And as I said earlier, when you all signed up for the AC3, you didn't sign up to go into another subcommittee and another subcommittee and meet every other week. I recognize that, but I want to present the opportunity for folks, if they're interested and have the time, to either volunteer to be part of that group that's going to work on that project, or maybe we need to have a discussion about some names out in the community beyond the AC3 that are relevant to, you know, sculpture, that kind of work, and be part of that process. It's going to be a fairly intensive process that will meet much more regularly than we will, but it's a really cool opportunity. So that's a parallel effort that's open to you all. Any initial thoughts on that?
Kevin, thank you so much for bringing that up. She actually spoke about it at our large group discussion.
Right.
If she can actually send us the entire advisory AC3, what her call is, that will help me pick people in my network that best fit what her needs are. And it
Okay.
can also spark new ideas. I'm also going to suggest all of you consider applying or collaborating with other artists in our community. So let's think beyond just this network, because we know we all have other peeps in other art communities. And then, you know, interpretive art, interactive art can be also part of it. So Antonetta, yes, you're gonna apply and get there. Thank you, Kevin, for reminding us of that opportunity. We're just a few minutes to the conclusion of our meeting. I just want to ask, are we feeling that we would like to meet again once we've all reviewed Thomas Warfield's outline and whatever anyone else throws at us? Should we meet before the large group meeting? How does everyone feel about
Definitely.
meeting once again?
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Okay, great. So I will put that out. Kevin and I will figure out some dates and alternatives, and we'll make sure we meet once before we meet as a large group. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that's great. So, and I think the same is true for the other subcommittee, that they probably need to meet one more time at least before the full AC3 comes back together. And that way we can all kind of sort of report back to each other about progress. So that larger group meeting might be more like August or something like that. And so we'll throw out some dates. So any other last thoughts or comments, Annette or otherwise?
I got two quickies here. We're working on a process here. Rocco's going to administer a public art competition. And we're really looking to set the precedent for a few key things that we haven't seen in Rochester. One, jurors being paid for their time, especially when we're including working artists on those juries. There may be some other people in positions who can opt out of such a payment. They may be in a position to say, no, that's okay, I don't need that, but offering to pay jurors levels up the professionalism of this process. And we're going to be really vocally advocating for the process that we're putting forth as a RFP process, where artists are paid for the proposal they develop. And that's a key thing. Very, very important. And so I'll be, Rocco will be kind of loud about that, and you all will be able to see our process with that. And back to your point, Kevin, about where's the sweet spot, I'll just toss it out there. In my opinion, the sweet spot is definitely, if there's 230,000 to go around, in my mind, the first time out with this equity fund, the sweet spot is definitely impacting more people with less than $40,000 per project. I think you said roughly 5, as a small number, and 100 as a high number. In my mind, projects around $5,000 or something like that, spreading those around the city and making sure we're doing so geographically attending to geography and past investments. In my mind, at least, that's a place to start where there's many more grants going out for public art than 5
Okay,
in my
that's
my
good to
mind.
hear. Yeah, no, anyone else have a take on that? That's a really important decision. Do you sort of lean towards that end of the spectrum with Blue?
I agree. The only thing that I have to bring up is that each type of art requires a different kind of budget. I unfortunately probably require the bigger type of budget because of the cost of bronze and
Mhm.
things like that. But I think maybe if there's a variety, maybe one larger one, slightly larger one, and then yes, definitely the smaller ones.
Yeah, the county's arts jumpstart had 3 buckets, and it really was very clearly outlined, defined. I knew which bucket I was in. I knew what the maximum I could ask for was. I will give credit that I thought the jumpstart application was completely user-friendly. I was more intimidated about actually getting on than doing it. And in fact, I actually spoke to the county lawyers and commended them about how user-friendly that application process was. I would love to make sure that we also do the same thing. NISCA and NEA gateways are unbelievably complicated, complex, and they are not meant to fund mid and small size art organizations.
Hmm.
So to ensure that we level the playing field, we must ensure that that gateway process, and let's hold a public PD on it. You know, how do you apply?
Hmm.
That's an easy 1-2 hour workshop. And that could be done on Zoom and in person.
Mhm.
And then also, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up, you know, the city runs recreational centers that are sometimes empty during the day because students and young kids are in school. So that could be, sharing space or common spaces could be a possibility as well.
Mhm.
And then we won't get into county, but that should be our long-term goal, is to collaborate with the county in the city, and especially in those places that they either administer together, which we do, or we administer buildings together, and we allocate in-kind services to each other. So I want us to not just think about the cash in the hand, but also the in-kind services, because the city and the county both provide those, and those are just as valuable as having cash in your hand.
Yes.
Annette, what was that recent, the experience with the county, and who did you?
Yeah,
Who?
I just completed it last week. Blue, you
Oh,
did it
what
as
county
well.
attorney was that? Can I?
Oh, Laura
Oh,
is,
oh,
yeah,
yeah, I know.
she's,
Okay,
so
thank you.
I have to ask her every single question in the Parks Department.
Okay, all right, okay.
And that, just real quick, is that you mentioned the county's jumpstarting process. Might that be a good starting point for us to like look at it and say, hey, this is
Absolutely.
a starting point.
Okay.
Let's adjust it to what our process should be. But since we're not starting from scratch.
For me, being a first timer, it was easy. I want Blue to chime in because he has
Okay.
more experience on it. But yes, it was very user friendly.
I personally feel like if we're aiming toward public art, however we're going to define that, again, I'm advocating for a very open, liberal definition of that. I think you're going to have people applying who aren't going to have some of those documents in that your theater group will, and that a ROCO will have at hand. So I think it was a seamless process. I agree, but it was seamless for small organizations.
Yeah.
I see this equity fund as being more likely targeted toward individual artists like Olivia, though her medium is much more expensive and maybe beyond the scope of this. So I think that the process should be even more simple and requiring fewer budgetary legal documents that individual artists just will not have. Even if they have a DBA and they have, studio insurance, et cetera, they're just not going to have some of the documents that the county required. So I would go right to, like, you know, the Philadelphia Percent for the Arts, for our example. I mean, they're the oldest, most venerable 1% for the arts in the country. They have this dialed in for sure.
Cool.
Thank you for that, Blue. And I will say one other last piece because we have Amanda with us. We should also look at those community art groups that can become fiduciaries for individual artists. So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Amanda, because Rock Arts United is an advocate voice, but can they also be a voice for artists that you can serve as a fiduciary for, so that they can apply to Rock Arts United, and then you can disseminate that out, because those are the places we're going to need, and that's how we can impact individual artists. You're right. Thank you for that clarification. As a small time organization, it was easy. As an individual artist, I would not have been able to do that or apply.
Rock Arts United has actually been talking for the last maybe 6 months or so about the potential to provide fiduciary oversight. Right now, they would probably need a nonprofit, because the group is still ad hoc. It would need a nonprofit organization through which to administer those funds. But the process of actually working out an application, and an equitable application, and that's approachable for individual artists, looking at need and merit, are all things we've actually outlined already. So Rock Arts United would actually be in a pretty good position to start something like that.
Cool. That's great to hear.
And we also have Teaching Artists Rock. So I want to mention that because many of the artists that were with young audiences are there. So we have 2 grassroots groups that are almost ready to take that on. And I will say that both these groups are neutral. They're not driven by one art organization, but multiple artists coming together. So they're a really great representation of, you know, an overview of arts in our community. Thank you, Amanda.
Can I just ask then, maybe for homework, Annette, could you maybe start over email maybe, or I don't know if you want to set up a meeting, a conversation with Blue and Thomas and anyone else, or maybe this whole subcommittee, about starting to advance the models that are already out there. So Philadelphia's got something, Thomas is working on, Thomas is working on something, the county's got something. Like, how do we pull the best of those things and start turning them into documents that work best for us? Could you maybe start that conversation over email and trading documents and such? That would be awesome. And that way, when we get together, we'll be a little bit further down that road.
Kevin.
Yeah.
You are, correct me if I'm wrong, it's important to maybe draw this line right away right now. The city is used to receiving applications and proposals from individual artists who may simply have a DBA for their studio, or they may not. They just may be, you know, Olivia Kim's studio and not even have a DBA. Is that correct?
I don't know. Johanna?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to be incorporated or to be an entity. You can be an individual to apply for a contract with the city. Yeah, absolutely.
For the traffic boxes, for example, painting those, or other smaller public art projects that the city has funded, an individual artist can apply for those. So that's the model that we're looking at. And the city is already used to funding artists directly. It doesn't have to go through a nonprofit, another entity.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
cool. But still, Rock Arts United would be a great organization to administer some of these funds for the city. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we may need to have a couple of models, so that, you know, for something like a light pole decoration, where there's it's going to be a small amount, there's very little risk, we wouldn't require insurance. That's one model. We want to make that as simple as possible, a few $1,000s. A major sculpture, you know, that's in the right of way, that has a lot of other issues, that's a different kind of work that may require a more complex process and a different kind of agreement. So we might have to have couple different levels for this.
Have you all ever met a cooler or easier to work with lawyer than Johanna?
Anything's all right, whatever.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Till I get down to the real thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I realize we're well past our time here. Thanks for your patience. And also a special thank you to Wanya and Max for interpreting. I watch you guys and I'm just like amazed at your
Yeah.
endurance and all that you do. So thanks for going a little over with us and sticking with us and serving our group.
Thank you.
Any other last thoughts on that, or are we good?
Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone.